Almost the entire second half of the last century was marked by the epic confrontation between the two world superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States.
Fortunately, a direct military conflict never happened, but several times the world literally stood on the brink of nuclear destruction. The fierce struggle took place in all areas, from the economy to sports and cinema. However, the most brutal confrontation took place between the intelligence agencies. It was a real secret war, the details of which we are only just beginning to learn. After all, the general public still judges it by James Bond movies, which are very far from reality. Today, thanks to some declassified archives, we can shed light on the lives of real spies. In this video, you will learn about real KGB agents who spent years stealing the most important secrets of the West, about their successes and their most notorious failures. Today is going to be interesting. My name is Semyon, and I declare the How They Lived segment open. Let's get started! Illegals and diplomat spies. Soviet intelligence officers of the Cold War were divided into two major categories. The first category included intelligence officers who worked under official cover. The second category consisted of agents who worked as illegals. It can be added that in this regard, the KGB was not a unique organization. All intelligence agencies around the world have operated and continue to operate in a similar way. Soviet spies under official cover were officially employed in embassies, various organizations, trade missions and cultural missions. That is, in institutions over which the red state flag was flown. They lived under their real names, had diplomatic passports, and were protected by international conventions. If they were exposed, which can happen to any intelligence officer, the worst that could happen to them was expulsion from the country. That's also quite unpleasant, because an exposed spy can no longer gather secrets, but this is nothing compared to the risks that illegals faced. Abroad, they were there with fake documents and officially had no connection to their homeland. They could be anyone – businessmen, journalists, actors or scientists. For example, the famous Rudolf Abel owned a photo studio in New York, and Conor Molody was involved in renting out slot machines. Outwardly, they were ordinary, inconspicuous people, nothing like movie heroes. If caught, an illegal agent faced arrest, interrogations, torture and a significant prison sentence, and in some countries even the death penalty. At the same time, the embassy couldn't help the intelligence officer in any way. He could only hope for a possible exchange, which didn't happen often. Illegal agents couldn't count on fame and recognition, because their line of work was a state secret. There is no statute of limitations in illegal intelligence, so we will never know anything about most Soviet agents. A successful intelligence officer who avoided betrayal and was never exposed remains a nameless figure forever, known only to a few colleagues. People in this profession are sometimes even buried under false names. How were cover identities created? Cover identities for KGB agents. One of the main components of successful work for any illegal intelligence officer was his cover identity. That's why this issue received a lot of attention, with every detail carefully considered. For example, if there was a cat living in the house of the person the agent was impersonating, he was required to know not only its name and color, but also its habits. Not to mention the house itself, the intelligence officer had to talk about it as if he had worked there, as if he was born and had lived his whole life there. Sometimes an illegal agent would have a biography created for him almost from scratch, starting with the birth record in a church register. For example, Conor Molody, according to his cover story, was a Canadian businessman whose parents died on their way to England. Then he ended up in a British orphanage, which was later also bombed by the Nazis. The only document the child had left was a church register entry in Toronto. Using it, KGB specialists made a complete set of all the necessary documents for Molotov. Moreover, authentic ink, paper and stamps were used to create them. They were specially acquired from all over the world. Usually, illegals arrived at their destination not directly, but through several transit countries, changing their documents each time. This made the work of counterintelligence even more difficult. After the illegal arrived in the country of residence, the process of establishing a legal cover began, which lasted 2 to 3 years. During this time, the agent would find housing, get a job, or start his own business and establish useful connections. In short, he became one of their own in the new country. Deep cover spies tried not to be seen near especially important or secret facilities, as it was an unjustified risk. To obtain enemy secrets and not fall into the hands of counterintelligence, intelligence had to strike a balance, to be not far from the object of interest, but not right next to it. How were Soviet secret agents selected and trained? Illegals are the true elite of intelligence. That's why the selection of candidates was extremely strict. They were chosen from higher educational institutions, among officers of the Soviet army and employees of state security agencies. What matters is not physical condition, but a person's character and psychological type. Contrary to established stereotypes taken from books and Hollywood movies, intelligence officers do not take part in fights, chases or shootouts. Their main weapon is intellect. It can also be added that, unlike movie heroes, real intelligence officers never carry weapons, listening devices, or hidden cameras with them. After all, if they are detained, such items will inevitably lead to failure. To become a successful spy, one needed to possess many qualities: strong will, courage, composure, and attentiveness, the ability to quickly assess different situations, and excellent language skills. It was preferable for the candidate to have skills in one or several professions that would allow him to earn a living. It was not easy to find a person who met these qualities. Such people were truly one of a kind. To find such a person, they would go through thousands of candidates, and only then would the training begin. Future Soviet illegals were taught how to recruit agents and meet with them, detect surveillance and evade it, set up secret caches and behave properly during interrogations. Training a single illegal agent took more than 1 year, and it cost the Soviet treasury a lot of money. Hundreds of thousands of rubles. The difficulties were not only in training the future spy. The agent's friends and relatives had to be given some explanation for his sudden disappearance and why they couldn't contact him. At the same time, even hinting at the true nature of the person's activities was strictly forbidden. Usually, the family was told that he was being transferred to serve in some remote backwater, for example, to a distant garrison somewhere in the far eastern military district. Meanwhile, the officer was actually in London or Hong Kong. A meeting with relatives could be arranged for an illegal agent. Usually, these meetings took place in one of the socialist countries of Eastern Europe, for example, in Czechoslovakia or Bulgaria. What did Soviet intelligence officers get caught on? Exposure is a nightmare for any spy. There was a whole set of instructions and rules on how not to get caught. The main thing is to avoid anything that could somehow arouse suspicion, and that could be anything. Excessive spending, obvious interest in state secrets, strange behavior, and so on. A real intelligence officer should not stand out in any way, so living large is taboo for him. It was extravagance that ruined several valuable Soviet agents in the West. And, of course, you couldn't have a weakness for women. It was especially forbidden to court glamorous women. For that, people would quickly be recalled to their homeland. Alcohol was also forbidden, because under the influence of liquor, a person would lose self-control, which is fatal for any spy. For example, the assistant of the famous Rudolf Abel loved to drink too much, which had the most unfortunate consequences for him. Even unusual behavior by a spy could lead to exposure. For example, one of the KGB intelligence officers recalled a case when he was approached for recruitment by a married couple on a train.
As a compliment, they told him that his political predictions always came true. Therefore, he should consider a career as a spy.
The Soviet agent realized he was about to be compromised. His behavior was too professional and did not match the cover story of an average businessman he was posing as.
However, most often, the reason for the illegals being compromised was betrayal.
During the Cold War, many high-ranking officers of the Soviet services fled to the West or began cooperating with Western intelligence agencies.
They were the ones who betrayed the illegals.
For example, Oleg Gordievsky, an officer of the first chief directorate of the KGB, gave up hundreds of Soviet agents to the British.
Moreover, the information was so valuable that MI6 didn't even dare to use it so as not to expose the defector.
Or take Anatoly Golitsyn, who gave up dozens of Soviet intelligence officers to the Americans and led to the final exposure of Kim Philby.
Soviet illegal spy networks were kept small, so that in case of failure, the consequences would be minimal.
If they grew too large, they were split in two. If one spy network was exposed, the second could remain unnoticed. A few words in conclusion. The Soviet illegal intelligence service can, without exaggeration, be called a unique phenomenon. Other intelligence agencies also had illegals, but nowhere else were there agents who lived in other countries for decades and gathered secrets.
Only Israel's Mossad has anything similar, but it relies on numerous Jewish diasporas scattered around the world. They say that the Americans also used illegals on the territory of the USSR, but these were short-term missions that lasted several months. Soviet spies lived a double life for decades. They were constantly under the threat of being exposed and arrested, and at the same time managed to obtain valuable information for their country. Let's hope that as the archives are opened, we'll be able to learn more about the secret agents who were on the hottest front of the Cold War.
Goodbye, everyone!